Welcome to another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton, and today's guest is Karolina Belwal, and we're speaking on mothers working outside of the home. Karolina is an entrepreneur and mother of two. She is a seasoned strategist with commercial operations and technology experience across industries. She most recently led people operations for a large multinational company headquartered in New York. She's a mother of two and decided she wanted to make it easier for other parents to get the support they need as they plan for and enter parenthood. She founded After Third to connect them with wellness providers who specialize in postpartum care. Hi, Karolina. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm very excited as well. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, me too. So we've actually known each other for a few years now, and I've been able to witness your progression with your site After Third, and it's been really exciting to witness your passion and your purpose and how it's unfolded over the past few years. So please tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you're creating.
Yes, so I am the founder of After Third, and we are a online community of professionals who care for new and expecting parents based out of New York City. And After Third started as a side project, a work of love, because as a working mother in the New York City area, I found that I wasn't able to get the support that I needed when I had my first child. And I also found that I had undiagnosed postpartum depression that lasted for over a year. And when I finally came out of that, I just couldn't walk away from the idea that in a city like New York, I shouldn't have had an experience like that. So After Third was born out of that. And the premise of what we're trying to do is we believe that the experience of parenthood doesn't end when the child is born, that after the third trimester, you're beginning on your journey. And we believe that parents deserve more support.
Definitely. And I do appreciate that you're including both parents, mom and dad. Sometimes even myself in my podcast, I get so mom-centric, so passionate about supporting women and moms, but dads need support as well. Sometimes even more so, I feel like, because there might be a void in that. So After Third is an opportunity for both moms and dads to get exposure to additional resources and information regarding this, really exciting but also overwhelming stage in their life.
Yes, exactly. And I think you'll find that we do end up speaking from the voice of the mother a lot, but certainly we're inclusive of both. And you're right, especially today when the definition of what it means to be a parent is evolving. I think if you just focus on moms, you're missing really the full picture. But we do talk about moms a lot because I think also when you look at mothers, it's hard to be a mother, but also because of societal expectations. But also, if you look at working mothers as a population, it's hard to live up to both professional expectations and to personal expectations and figure out how to do both. And that's a cause that's very personal for us and one that we want to be part of in terms of changing the results that we see today.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, let's talk about that. Women that are professionals and that continue working outside of the home after having a baby, which we're calling working mothers. Tell us about the stats.
Yes, so 72% of mothers in the U.S. work, according to the Department of Labor. And an interesting statistic that we have from Pew Research is that if you look at moms today, moms on average work 25 hours a week, and they spend 14 hours on childcare. And what they mean by that is actively engaging with the child. In 1965, women worked 9 hours and spent 10 hours actively engaging in childcare. So today, it's not just the fact that more women work, it's that they're actually spending more time actively on childcare. And if you look at social dynamics, we're less likely to have parents around, we're less likely to have community that can support us, that can be there if our child gets sick, something like that. So you're really looking at an environment that's more challenging for parents today, and especially for mothers.
Right. And when you said parents, you were referring to the grandparents and just in general, like a extended family support for
Yes.
childcare. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Yeah,
The
go ahead.
the
The
village
village.
the village has changed, and it's just not what it used to be.
Correct. It's evolved. It has changed. Okay, so what I'm hearing from those stats is that women are working harder than ever to not only be professional but also to be the best moms that we can be. So what does that look like for us as women?
Well, it's interesting because it's hard to answer that question, because I think when you think about what it looks like, you can look to the representations of parents that we see in the media. So, what it looks like to us from an aspirational perspective, I think, are, at its most real, parents like Chrissy Teigen. Um, but it's a lot of images of parents who seem to be able to do everything and still have plenty of opportunities to take pictures with matching outfits in a beautiful and clean house, and manage a career as well. I think that's what we aspirationally think it looks like. But what it really looks like is that parents are less satisfied than they ever have been, because it's taking a toll. And what we see is that 43% of women take a career break, and almost half of those women do it for family reasons. So, and that stat is interesting because it contributes to another one, which is the motherhood penalty. So I think we all know that women earn 87 cents to a dollar of what men earn, but women in their prime family years earn 71 cents on the dollar,
Wow.
on the male dollar.
And that's specific in the US.
Yes, this is in the US. But the thing is that though these stats are specific to the US, these trends aren't necessarily specific to the US.
So let's talk about that motherhood penalty.
Yes. So I have some stories about this, and I know that you also have a story about this, that we talked about when we spoke last time. So I have stories from women who work in corporate environments who have personally experienced this, and then I think I would love to hear your story as well, because it's, as a business owner, the same sort of impact on you, as these women saw in a corporate setting. So as part of the research that we've done for After Third, we've had lots of conversations with parents. And one of the things that we're looking into is specifically women who work in these corporate environments and in these more sort of, I guess, traditional types of jobs. And one of the stories that I heard was from a woman at a law firm, and she said that when she decided to get pregnant, she knew that she would be taken off the partner track, or at least delayed. And because of the age that she was at, she decided that she was going to do that. And she was right. She ended up having her promotion delayed by, I believe it was 2 years, because she decided to get pregnant and to take maternity leave. Of course, while she was pregnant, she kept working her long hours. And after she came back from maternity leave, she kept working the same hours. But it was purely during that maternity leave that derailed her from that promotion timeline. So
Wow. And it was obviously not a 2-year maternity leave.
no, it wasn't. But she knew exactly what was going to happen before she had a child. That being said, it's still a little disheartening. I heard another story from a woman at a senior technology company, and she had a very visible role on a leading product, and she had quite a large team. And she waited until the very end of her pregnancy, where she couldn't really hide it anymore, to announce that she was pregnant and would be taking maternity leave. And while she was on maternity leave, her role disappeared. They completely changed the team. And when she came back, she didn't have a job anymore. And it took her a little while to find a new role, and that role was nowhere near the level of responsibility that she had in her prior role.
Right. So it was like a demotion, and I'm sure not just roles, but also financially, there was probably a pay cut.
Well, fortunately, I don't think they, at least on the base salary, they did the pay cut. I'm sure her performance bonus opportunity would have been lower. But in terms of her career progression, something like that can derail you quite a bit.
Right. And, what you're sharing with these two women's stories is they were very conscious in wanting to create a family. We see, especially in the New York City area, women are very career oriented and tend to wait till later in their life to start a family, 35 and up. And that was the case for me as well, because the career came first, right? And you're in your 20s, early 30s, working, going up the career ladder. And then the biological clock kicks in and you're like, if I'm going to have a baby, I better do it now before I'm no longer able to. But that's also challenging because it's like in the middle of the prime of their career, right? Late 30s, early 40s, as opposed to having a child when you're in your early 20s, for example, and then going up the career ladder after the fact.
It's interesting because before I had children, someone told me that you basically have to make that decision by looking at two variables. On one hand, you have your ability and your youth and your energy to take care of the child. And on the other hand, you have your financial security. So the further along you get, the more financial security and career security you have. But perhaps the less time you have or the less energy you have. And it's interesting because I don't think that's fully true. I mean, I've seen, I don't think that energy necessarily correlates to when you have the child, but certainly you have more responsibilities as you get older. So it is very much a trade-off that I think a lot of parents make. And it's a conversation my husband and I had when we were deciding to have children. And I was 29 when I had my first, so I was on the younger side. But I had also gone to business school a bit younger, and I was in a little bit of a different phase of my career at that point. I was able to fit it into my career, but we had that discussion. Would it be better to wait until I had gotten to perhaps a managing director level within the corporate setting? I actually got promoted while I was pregnant. So my story is a little bit of contradicts the two stories I just shared. But I got promoted while I was pregnant with my first. And when I was shortly after I had my second, I also got a promotion. So for my career personally, I was able to architect it in such a way that it didn't have an impact. But I also recognized that, I was very lucky to be in that position and that I had made sort of very specific decisions to be able to do that. And those decisions aren't necessarily available to everyone. So it certainly is possible to keep yourself on the career track when you have children, but it takes a lot to make that work out.
Right. And to your point, I guess in certain corporations, that's not even available. So it just depends on where you're working. And it's, I guess, being also very deliberate. Some corporations are more family friendly than others, right? And that goes back to even like the type of parental leave they offer, both maternity and paternity leave. I think there is becoming more of a focus on these bigger corporations offering paid parental leave as well as more time off for both moms and dads when a baby is born.
Yes, that's true. And I think the reason why they do that is interesting. Part of it is because society's expectations have changed, but part of it is because when they're trying to attract working parents and when they're trying to attract individuals who one day want to be parents, that's something that those people take into consideration. So for them to be able to attract new talents and retain the individuals that they have within their company, it's more and more important to be able to offer these sorts of benefits.
It's so true. And I did want to share my story. I had to think for a second when you mentioned my story because I have so many of them. But specific to the motherhood penalty, I'm as an entrepreneur, and I know we're focusing a lot on moms here working in the corporate world, but as a mom working for myself, self-employed, it's really hard to take time out of your business when you're running your business and dependent on your work is dependent on your pay is dependent on your work, right? I didn't have any paid leave when I took when I gave birth to my son. So what happened is recently, this past year, I've decided to move my office, my practice, my chiropractic practice. And I was looking for a business loan to build out a beautiful new state-of-the-art wellness center here in Hoboken. And it was interesting to me that as I was going to banks to get funding for this loan, I had a lot of challenges because they wanted to see the past 2 years of my tax returns, and I had a dip in income personally because I had not only taken a few weeks off for maternity leave, literally 5 weeks, but I also, not enough, and 2 weeks prior to giving birth. So I guess total, I was 7 weeks out of my practice of actually seeing patients. And when I did return, it was very part-time. So my hours in the office seeing patients was also still quite low because it was important for me to be at home with my son as much as possible when he was newborn. And so the point of my story is that my income was less because my physical presence in my office was less. And the banks were like, well, we, see that your income is lower, so we're not going to give you a loan. And I would say, well, here's, my tax return from 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when I was making more money because it was prior to the birth. And I would have to provide these documents, which were not typical because they usually just look at the past two in order to prove. And I had to show them what we were expected to do for 2019 to prove to these banks, and it was a bunch of men I was dealing with, that my business was sustainable. My business was trustworthy to receive a loan. I would repay the money. This was not going to be a loss for their bank. It was really challenging, and it actually took me 3 banks to be able to secure just a $50,000 loan. So the good news is that did happen, and the build out is happening, and the space will be finished soon. But I was quite shocked. Being a business owner now for almost 15 years, I've never had challenges with getting funding for my business. And this was eye-opening for me. I was like, wow, I really did not even see an issue with getting a loan for my business.
So I think that your story also illustrates really well the idea that, we've addressed some of the biggest issues that women in the workforce had to face, that mothers in the workforce had to face in terms of, the anti-discrimination laws that have been passed. But there are systems in place that still have some level of bias in them. And, your example of getting a loan from a bank, a lot of those decisions are made because they have some formula in the background. And that formula obviously doesn't take into account a case like yours where you have a very good business, but you took maternity leave and had a child. And it's, things like this that we don't really think about because they're not so obvious. We don't think about them until we encounter them. So it's very powerful that you had that experience. And I'm glad that you were able to find a bank that thinks a little bit differently.
Yeah, the key really is I went to 2 large banks. One of them I've been banking with for years, and they were the ones with the formulas and the very strict calculations and the numbers, and they were shooting me down. But when I went to a local smaller bank who did know my business, knew that I had been operating for many years, they were the ones that were like willing to overlook the formulation and look at me as an individual and as an entrepreneur and recognize that I wasn't going to be delinquent. Because at the end of the day, they just want to get their money back, right? And I understand that. That's their business. But when they were able to overlook the numbers and look at me and know that they would get their money back, that was what I appreciated. And it's interesting. It took somebody local who was, they were intimately aware of how my business operated and the services I provide here in Hoboken.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. The other part of your story that stands out to me is that you went back to work after 5 weeks. And I was fortunate. I had 3 months of paid leave the first time around and 4 months the second time. And in the US, I think something like 25% of new moms return to work after 2 weeks. which is just mind blowing to me. And, it, unless you work at a company with over 50 employees, your company is not required to give you annual leave, unpaid annual leave. We're, I think, the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a paid maternity leave policy.
Wow.
So it's very interesting. So, but I would love to ask you a question. Actually, I know that it's supposed to be the other way around, but what advice do you have to women in your shoes who
Hmm.
are, independent business owners, if they're thinking of having a child?
Yeah.
What are the things they need to think of in advance to prepare to be in a good position?
Yeah. One thing I did do is I hired an associate doctor because I did need somebody physically in my office performing the services, the physical hands-on service of chiropractic after I gave birth, and I wasn't going to be able to do that type of work. And also to do it full time when I did not want to go back full time office hours. So that was one thing I did, and it took me. And when you're looking to kind of replace yourself and find a mini me, it can take a long time to find the right person. So for me as a small business owner, I took literally a couple years to find the right fit and hire her and train her, and that all happened actually even before I got married, because I was already knowing that once I got married, I wanted to start a family immediately after. So she was able to be on board and trained in my practice a year and a half prior to me giving birth. So that was really helpful that I had that support in office, and I was able to delegate a lot to her and know that my business was in good hands. And then the other thing, and this can be hard, especially for me, like I was paying for a wedding and then got pregnant immediately after. There wasn't a lot of time between. But ideally, if you can have savings, personal savings set aside so that you're not feeling the stress of having to get back in to make money, you have that cushion to support you. And as we all know, when we have babies, they cost money. So there's additional expenses that come with having a child. So having the funds set aside just takes some of that pressure off.
Yes, and that's something that, I also heard in the conversations with parents. It's the financial planning, and it's just sort of planning in general, because to the extent that you can remove the uncertainty and the chaos from the change, because at the end of the day, this is a huge life change. It's a huge transformation. Every part of your life gets impacted. Your relationships, your work, your self identity, everything gets impacted in some way by, becoming a parent. So planning is really key. The financial planning piece is really interesting because I like to think of it in a few ways. One is obviously children are expensive. So figuring out, what does your spending look like after you have a child? But then a big piece of that is childcare. So what kind of childcare do you need to support your other activities, and how much does that cost? And then, of course, I think saving a little bit of funds to support, yourself and help you navigate through this change. So, for example, being able to go and get chiropractic services, or being able to hire a postpartum doula to help you, or even if you're staying home, let's say for a while, being able to have a part-time sitter come in to give you a little break. So the planning aspect, I think, is key. And a lot of people, I know you talk about this a lot, but a lot of people plan to what their birth plan is like, but they don't necessarily plan to what life is like after that moment.
Yeah, and finances are so huge. I really, in some ways learned that the hard way as a new parent. And I didn't have a really good idea of what the cost would be. And also as an entrepreneur, I don't have family locally to help with childcare for free. So my husband and I are both self-employed, which means we both tend to, work a lot of hours on our business, and we can't run your business and take care of your child at the same time. Just for me, it does not work. I have to, I have to have childcare. So that we were really kind of shocked by how much we've spent now in the past 2 years on childcare. My husband's like, oh my God, I could have bought another Porsche. Like you just really don't sometimes know it till you're in it. But if you really think like, well, how many hours a week will neither one of us be able to take care of our child? That's when you have to hire someone, calculate $15 an hour. Services. Parents will do whatever it takes to get their child the services that they need, and at the expense sometimes of moms and dads getting self-care. So ideally, if you can have money set aside for the whole family to receive care after the birth is important. And the best way to do something like that would be through HSA or FSA savings. That's what health savings accounts are for, is to be able to have those dollars to use towards these types of self-care practices that may not be covered by insurance, but are very important for the health and vitality of the whole family unit. And that's also really, really important. I think, to your point, not only just the physical health and the recovery for mom after birth, but there's very much an emotional health component as well. And that's really important, especially if there's any postpartum mood disorders or tendency towards that. These moms need additional support.
Yes. And that's what I found was so challenging for me. I had certain expectations around what postpartum was going to be like, how I was going to be as a parent. And I just thought that it was something that was going to be difficult, but that I would figure it out. And, at the end of the day, first of all, you can't really figure it out on your own. And I say on my own, I had my husband there, and he's, an incredible partner, but I was the one who was home on maternity leave. And it was just actually a very lonely experience. And I think one of the big things I forgot was that I had to give myself time to adjust and time to heal. That, when you go to that 6-week visit and they say, you've healed sufficiently, that doesn't mean that your healing journey has completed. And it doesn't mean that just that purely sort of medical piece, that's the only element that's part of that journey. And, thinking about working parents, and now I'm not just talking about parents in the corporate setting, but sort of, any parents, any moms that work, whether it's freelance, whether it's, stay at home moms full time, whether it's in a corporate setting, whether it's as a business owner, it's really hard to be the best version of yourself in your personal and professional commitments if you haven't made the time to take care of yourself, because you're really trying to do more things than you ever have in the past with less energy, with less of a reserve. So it's easy to think, I think, that these things aren't as important when you have a human to take care of and a job to maintain or a business to grow. But at the end of the day, you won't achieve probably as much as you want to achieve if you don't invest in yourself that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mom is self-care. That is the mantra that I try to share every single episode for the listeners of Well-Adjusted Mama, because it really is that important. And we have to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first prior to taking care of our children, our partners, all of the other responsibilities that we say yes to in our lives. I was hoping that we could close with some practical tips that you have found maybe successful for your life, or that you share on After Third, about how to find balance between the professional, family, and the self.
So for me, there's really two categories of answer here. The first is, I want to talk about how you actually navigate your career and the career ladder as a working parent. And then I want to talk about, really practical, actionable things that you can do to support the goals that you have in your life. So in terms of looking at your career ladder, your career progression, you have to think 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, what do I want to be doing? Where do I want my career to be? You have to be able to visualize forward, because if you think too short term, it can seem hard to actually make the right kind of decisions. And then you have to think about, what are your needs? So for me personally, my background was doing strategy, and a lot of people who have that kind of job work for consulting firms and they travel full time. I knew that that wouldn't allow me to achieve my personal goals, so I looked for a strategy job within a company. It's a trade off that I made. I still had a really good career progression. I was still able to achieve my professional goals, but I consciously made a trade off knowing that I wanted to both have a certain career path and be able to have a family as well. So you have to figure out what your end goal is and then think about, based on the several goals you have in your life, how can you actually achieve that end goal? And then find allies, because once you know where you want to get to and what kind of a path you can take to get there, you're not going to be able to get there alone. I've always been very selective about who I work for, what kind of managers do I work for, what kind of organizations do I work for, because at the end of the day, I knew that I could do a really good job, that I could provide a lot of value to the teams that I work with, but I also knew that I needed some level of flexibility. I needed some level of trust to be able to handle the unknown that comes with being a working parent. So I was always very careful about who I worked for. I wanted to make sure that the people that I worked for were allies and that we had the same expectations about what it meant to do a good job. So it's very important to be really proactive about those decisions. And I would say that from a career progression perspective, that's what helped me be successful. Um, Now, the toolkit, that's a very sort of cliche word, but as a former consultant, I love using that word, toolkit or playbook. But these are the set of sort of actions you can take or plans that you can make to help you as you figure out how you actually plot your life forward. Because I think whenever you want to achieve something, you can hope that it works out, you can work toward it day to day. But if you want the highest odds of achieving that thing, you sit down and you plan, you architect that journey. So for a working parent, I think the first piece is that you have to know what your must haves are. So sit down and write down on a piece of paper, what are the things you absolutely have to be able to do in your personal life to be satisfied? What are the commitments you absolutely have to be able to uphold in your professional life? And Laura, this is what you and your husband essentially did when you sat down and you plotted the childcare. But for me, for example, it was that I had to be able to drop off my children every morning, so I didn't have any meetings before 9:30. Now, usually I got to work definitely before that, but I needed that space just in case. For me, there was a certain meeting I had to be able to do every week on an evening, or there were certain hours of that I had to be physically present at my work. So I figured out what those things were personally and professionally. I sat down with my husband and we figured out how to actually make that work between the two of us. Because when you plan ahead, you have more reserve if there is uncertainty, if one of the if the child gets sick or something like that. But if every day you have to figure these things out completely from a new position, then it becomes exhausting.
And it's
And
chaos.
I know yes, exactly. And I know you're a planner as well. So you I'm sure do a lot of this as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second piece, again, comes back to your story, arranging childcare that works for you. So I think the two most popular options that I see in the New York City area are a nanny or daycare. And, you know, how you figure out what's best for you is you sit down and you look at, sort of from a budget perspective and from a time perspective, what makes sense. So what can you afford? And then what kind of coverage do you need? That at the most basic level, that's how you make that decision. And then when you look at a nanny, really it's around, you have more flexibility with a nanny. Your child has care one-on-one with someone. If you look at a daycare setting, some people feel sort of more secure having multiple people available to look after the children. You don't have to worry if a nanny gets sick. And some people prefer not to have a single caregiver because they rather not have someone who's a substitute for them, or they don't feel that they can trust a single person. Those aren't the only options. There's family, there's au pairs, there's nanny shares. But at the end of the day, whatever option you choose, it'll come down to how much you can spend and how much time you need covered are the two first questions that you need to answer. And then backup care, for parents who don't have necessarily as flexible of a schedule, this becomes really important. If you know that you can take time off when your child gets sick, that your job's flexible enough that you can always do that, this is easy. But if you know that you might not necessarily have that flexibility, then you have to plan in advance for that. Maybe you and your partner take turns. Maybe grandma is around and has the flexibility to come in and help out. Maybe you actually arrange backup care. So there's nanny agencies that will do emergency care. But you have to find those in advance and make sure you have a relationship with them beforehand. They tend to be expensive, but that, of course, is an option. So at the end of the day, knowing which option's available to you and what you're doing is really important, so it's not a surprise.
Yeah, I know for me, like we have a nanny, and occasionally if she has not been able to come in and my husband and I don't necessarily have flexible schedules, we have a list of backup sitters that I am calling and getting one of them on board to help out. And one time I actually brought my son to the office, so that was an option as well. Yeah, it can be stressful, right? When things, and I think it's also anticipating the unexpected because things do happen, and you have to have some flexibility and know what am I going to do in those scenarios.
Yes. So, this is where the term resilience is really, really important. I think you're right. Change is a constant, and there's always unpredictability when you're a parent. I mean, there's unpredictability in life, but even more so when you're a parent because you're taking care of someone else. And you have to accept that you can't control everything. You have to accept that you may have a certain arrangement when your child is a year old, but it's going to look different when they're 4 years old, and that's okay. Planning ahead gives you, creating schedules and habits gives you safety. It gives you predictability, and it gives you space to practice resilience, which is really important. So this is also where self-care comes in, and this is where connecting to your community comes in. But it's a lead in to the next. There's three other things. So we talked about knowing your must-haves. We talked about arranging childcare that works for you. Um, Creating schedules and habits to ease the mental load. So as much as you can, sit down, make a list of the things that have to happen every day for your morning to work the way you want it to. So do you have to pack food for your child for school? Do you have to have the food ready in advance? Do you have to have your bottles clean so you can take them to work that day? What's required in the morning so that you can get out of the house comfortably without being too stressed? And then you can sit down and just make a list of all those things and figure out, should I do them the night before? Should I do them over the weekend? And who does them? It sounds so basic, but doing that kind of planning with the things that are repeatable in your life, it just means that you don't have to think about it. So you have more space in your mind to think about the surprises that come up, or the things that maybe you want to think about, like, your child and how they're developing and how you should handle the new flavor of temper tantrums that they've developed. Because those are constantly changing. And then this is the big one you talked about, which is make space for self-care and make space also for relationship care. You have to refuel your tank, and you have to also, when you're co-parenting especially, invest in that relationship. Yes, because you're a team. And if you're not on the same page, if you don't feel good about it, you're not going to both get what you need out of the situation that you guys have built for yourself.
Yeah, the intimate relationship self-care component was also kind of eye-opening for me. And that actually started feeling stressed during the pregnancy, and then obviously continued with the newborn, and you have sleep-deprived parents, and just a lot of additional responsibilities and stressors, right? So it can be really challenging on relationships, and not just maintaining a relationship that's barely functioning and avoiding divorce, but looking at how you can actually thrive as a couple, and putting, especially if you're married, putting your marriage as a priority is really important.
Yes, when I was pregnant with my son, I was in a cab, and the cab driver gave me some unsolicited advice. And he looked at me and he said, "Make sure you make time for your husband." And I was 9 months pregnant, and I was sitting there thinking, my husband better make time for me, because I will have just birthed a baby. And at the time, I was really annoyed by the unsolicited advice. But in retrospect, he was right. He was completely right, because I've talked to hundreds of parents at this point, and this is something that keeps coming up. It doesn't matter how good the relationship is. It's a huge change. You're both exhausted. You're both under a lot of stress. You probably both don't know what you're doing. And, under those conditions, it's hard to communicate in the way that you need. It's hard to first of all, your relationship is not going to be exactly the same as it was. So you're going through a change, and then you don't actually have time to process that change. So there's two things we heard a lot. One is, sit down with your partner before you have a baby, write down the list of all the things that you're going to have to do now, and figure out who does them. And then 3 months after the baby's born, take a look at that list again, and reassess it again to make sure that you've divided things. It tends to be a source of resentment that the women tend to do more than the men. But the other thing we find is that in most cases, the men just haven't necessarily thought of it or noticed it. There's that resentment, but no one's actually talked about it.
Right. Communication is so key. And I do find that at least I should only speak for my relationship. I can't speak for others, but with my husband, if I ask for help in a loving way and I show appreciation for how he helps around the house, it goes a long way. It makes him feel like he's winning and he's a hero.
Yes. And, in my case, it was just, my husband and I had to sit down, and I told him, I need you to do these things instead of me doing it. And he did. We sat down, talked about what it was. In his case, he orders the groceries. I hate going grocery shopping, so this was really a big win for me. Mm-hmm. And he likes it. So
same in my
but
relationship.
It's little things like that.
Right.
But it makes a huge difference, because if you are there sort of helping each other through, the stress and the exhaustion, then you have another person in your corner, instead of feeling like you're not on the same page. And not only are you having to take care of a child, you're having to take care of someone else.
Right.
So it's incredibly important. And then the self-care bit, I know we only have a couple minutes, but I think we've talked about this, but I think the other piece that came out is that, a lot of people think self-care means having the workout routine they had before, doing whatever it was that they had before, or making a large amount of time for self-care. And it doesn't have to be that. It can be as simple as, you give yourself 10 minutes every morning to meditate. You make sure that when you have your coffee in the morning, you get a few minutes of quiet. When your child is having a temper tantrum, you give yourself permission to step outside of the room and take a deep breath, and then come back in. You don't have to react right away. And you can just start there. And from there, then you can look at, what do I need to do to support my mental health? What do I need to do to support my physical health? Things like getting chiropractic care, getting a massage, taking the time to invest in fitness so you get your strength back, so your back doesn't hurt anymore, things like that.
Totally. And I do really appreciate the meditation component, and that can look a lot different for a lot of people, but it's really just an opportunity to have quiet where you're actually doing nothing. That's the key there. And every every mom needs that because there's so much, we're constantly doing things, right? Do. And whether it's professionally or personally, and that self-care component of quieting your mind and being still allows us to manage our emotional state, which will help in communicating with our partners. It helps with communicating our children. And when we have, and I do have a husband who has tantrums too. So when I'm managing a tantrum for an adult or a child, how do I react to that other individual? That's in my control, but it's hard to control our emotional state when we haven't given ourselves time to have a quiet mind. So I feel like that's really key to me, and that actually improves my interactions with everyone around me. That could even include strangers, by the way. If I'm feeling annoyed by somebody, a service person that's providing a poor service, for example, how I respond to that person is based on how I can control my emotional state. And that actually can dictate the rest of my day, right? So I think that that's so important.
Well, it's so funny you say that because I always tell people that I've become a better professional because I'm a mother. Because your children can teach you things at a more basic level, but the way they behave, the motivations they have, it's the same in adults. It's just more sophisticated. So you get to practice in a simpler setting. They may be louder, they may scream more, but the motivations, the things they want, they're simpler. And so I had to fill out this form recently, and one of the questions was, what's one of your favorite business books? One of my favorite business books is How to Learn to Speak So Children Will Listen. It's a parenting book about communication, because when I read that book, I started using those techniques on my husband, and I started using those techniques in the workforce, on the people I managed, on my manager, because I found that they were spot on. So it was just it's enlightening what you can learn from your children if you give yourself the space.
And the second half of that book title is How to Listen So Children Will Speak, right?
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. I
Someone
botched
told me
that
about
title.
that book. So I actually have not read it yet, but this is the second time that book is coming up for me as a recommendation. And I think I'm going to make that a priority because I think it boils down to really like basic communication 101, right? And when we can master that or move towards mastery, it will positively impact every area of our life, as you're saying. Intimate relationships, childcare, relationships with our children, as well as the relationships in our professional life. And like I mentioned, even the day to day, like the Target checkout person, right? How I communicate to that person is going to can impact how I am received and their response. And essentially, the type of mood that I can have for myself, as well as what I can give. If I'm giving love and kindness to people, it will be reflected back.
Yes, it's so true. It is. It takes a lot of work to get there, but it's completely true and worth it.
It's worth it. And it's an opportunity also to model how we speak to others and how others speak to us, right? If our children are present when we're having these interactions, we can actually model that behavior as well.
Yes, exactly. And I learned that professionally and personally, if you want people to behave a certain way, you need to model that behavior, because if they see you doing something else, that first of all, they're going to have a hard time understanding what you're asking them for, and then they're not going to actually think that you're sincere when you're asking them to do it, whether it's an adult or a child.
Right. Totally. Well, Karolina, I really appreciated this thought-provoking conversation and, all the information and wisdom that you were able to share in today's episode.
Thank you for having me. As always, it was really nice to talk to you about these things. You have a lot of depth around this area, and I love hearing about your personal experiences as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.